So the Jakobi Meyers situation is kind of turning weird at this point, where some people are starting to speculate that Jakobi Meyers is essentially forcing the Las Vegas Raiders to trade him. This isn't even something the Raiders want to do, and we're getting some more pieces. They have kind of made some people to think about that. We're going to talk about that in today's video. There's a couple other things I want to get into at the end of this video, but let's go ahead and just get right into it. So early this morning, our offensive coordinator Chip Kelly did a presser, and in that presser, he talked a little bit about Jakobi. Right, he talked about him. Jakobi, obviously, we know is a good football player. I think the Raiders definitely need him this season, given where our injuries and those type of things are at this point. And Chip Kelly actually put it out there saying that the team expects Jakobi Meyers to practice today. The Las Vegas Raiders expect Jakobi Meyers to be out there on the football field. This is something Chip Kelly told us earlier, and a lot of people are like, hey, I guess he's not going to be traded. Maybe he truly is hurt. And if you guys don't know this, yesterday, there was a report that came out of nowhere, right? Because most of us thought, hey, Jakobi Meyers is playing at this point. He's going to stay with the Raiders. Even though he asked for a trade, he just, played through it. So there should be no issue going forward. But then out of nowhere, Jakobi Meyers apparently wants to be traded, or apparently Jakobi Meyers is going to be traded, right? This was a report that came out from Ricky Scoops yesterday. And then at the same time, 2 hours later, Jakobi Meyers is on the injury report. He's been healthy every single game this season, has not even touched the injury report. And out of nowhere, the day that the report comes out that the Raiders are going to trade this guy, he's on the injury report. We all put it together that it's just a matter of time until this guy gets traded, right? It's just a matter of time until Jakobi Meyers is shipped somewhere else. But with Chip Kelly now saying the team expects Jakobi to play, and of course, an hour later, as media hits the field, Jakobi Meyers is nowhere to be on the football field. Jakobi Meyers did not practice. He did not come out there. And now we're getting these reports that Jakobi Meyers is actually forcing his way out of the Las Vegas Raiders roster. He's forcing his way out of Vegas. But basically what we're hearing now, right, and this is like the most recent up-to-date information. And this could, not technically be true, but based off of what we're hearing, this is most likely what it is. We have insiders saying that, hey, the Raiders have had teams reach out as recently as 2 weeks ago. There's been multiple teams, right? Josina Anderson reported this earlier. Multiple teams have reached out as recent as 2 weeks ago, and the Raiders continue to say, no, we are not trading Jakobi Meyers. We're 100% set on keeping him. He will be part of this team as we go forward. But Jakobi Meyers popped up on the injury report yesterday, and he's not practicing. Chip Kelly thinks he's going to be out there today. Chip Kelly says the team expects him out there. And again, he's not practicing. So we now know Jakobi Meyers is actually forcing himself out of Las Vegas. We now know Jakobi Meyers just doesn't want to be here. And I can't blame Jakobi Meyers, given, 5-6 weeks ago, before the season begun, he had made it clear that he wants a new contract. Jakobi wasn't happy, and he publicly requested a trade. And although the Raiders said we're not going to trade him, and although he had every right to say, I'm not going to play, I'm going to hold out, he decided not to do this. In good faith, Jakobi Meyers said, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to play, and hopefully we're able to work out a contract. And we're also hearing there's like the numbers, right? Like the official numbers of what this guy wants. It's not even that crazy. He only wants between $15 to $18 million. Now, I don't know how accurate these numbers are, but if that is true, then the Raiders should give him the 15 to 18 million. And if they don't want to give it to him, then you trade him. And that's what Jakobi Meyers is wanting right now. He wants the Raiders to either pay him, which they're unwilling to do, right? That is also part of the report, which means Jakobi Meyers wants that trade. He wants out of Vegas. And at this point, it looks like Jakobi's not going to play for the Raiders until he gets one of those two things to happen. So Jakobi, in his essence, is forcing himself out. I don't personally blame him. I understand from his perspective. His contract at $11 million was always kind of a steal, right? He signed a 3-year, $33 million contract. That was always kind of a steal for the Raiders. He's well outproduced that contract. At the same time, players don't play on the final years of their contracts if there's no guaranteed money. Maxx Crosby told us before the start of the season he might hold out. Colt Miller told us he might hold out. Both of those guys kind of put it out there in different ways. And both guys got contracts, and both guys still technically had this entire year where they were technically still under contract. So Jakobi's just kind of doing the same thing that both Maxx and Colt Miller have done. But the Raiders have made it clear they don't want him, or they don't want to pay him at least long term, right? And again, just kind of keep in mind that at this point, teams have reached out to the Raiders, and the Raiders continue to say, no, we are not trading Jakobi Meyers. Now, that could also be because maybe the Raiders don't like the compensation. If Jakobi Meyers is in his prime, which he still technically kind of is, and if the Raiders had Jakobi Meyers locked in for 3 years and, it's 15 million, but the Raiders are going to pick up most of that cap. If that was where Jakobi Meyers was, a team might say we'll give you a 3rd round pick for Jakobi. He's under contract. You guys are going to pick up some of that dead cap. So for us, it's cheaper, and he is under contract. A team might be willing to say we'll give you a 3rd or a 4th round pick. But that's not where Jakobi Meyers is, right? Jakobi Meyers is in a spot where he wants to get paid. So a team at the most that, is going to be willing to trade for a guy like Jakobi, they're going to say, hey, we'll give you, a 6th round pick, and in return, we'll take Jakobi in a 7th. Right? That's kind of where his value is at this point. And again, I understand for the Raiders, there's more value in just keeping Jakobi going into the rest of the season than there is saying let's swap a 6th and a 7th. Right? At least in my opinion, I think there's more value for the Raiders just to keep Jakobi Meyers. But again, Jakobi does not want to play for the Raiders if he doesn't get that contract. And the trade deadline's about 2.5 weeks away. So Jakobi knows if there's at any point, him essentially going to hold out, right now is the time for him to hold out. I don't know exactly what Jakobi Meyers wants and exactly what the Raiders are willing to give him. But if he wants like $15 million, if I'm the Raiders, you have to consider if $15 million is worth it for this guy. Even if it's $18 million, you have to consider, there are wide receivers getting $25 million right now. There's some wide receivers getting $28 million, $35 million. And I know Jakobi's not worth 35, right? He's not one of the top wide receivers, but there are a lot of guys getting $20 million right now. And I think Jakobi is definitely in the same ballpark as some of those guys. So if he only wanted 18 million, you have to consider, giving this guy what he wants. And if you don't want to pay him, I think the best thing the Raiders can do right now is just up the money and guarantee it to him. Right? And I know he probably doesn't want to do that. Right? I think he probably wants something long term. But the Raiders are going to have to figure this out because it is turning to the point where it might not be a team distraction right now, but Jakobi Meyers is in the building and guys are talking to him and saying, hey, what's going on? And he's saying, hey, it's a contract situation. I have to be in the building. Otherwise, they're going to start finding me. It starts becoming a distraction. And then don't overlook the fact that Jakobi's a leader in that locker room. He's one of the nicest guys you will ever talk to. Trust me on that. The guy's a really, really, really good person. And Raiders players, right, the guys in the locker room, they understand that and they agree with that as well, right? Jakobi's a really, really well-respected person within the locker room. He does everything the right way. And if you're not willing to pay that guy, which the Raiders obviously aren't at this point, gotta move this guy and kind of give him what he wants. I think it's important as a general manager, and obviously I'm not a general manager, but I think it's very important to give players what they want because players talk to one another. Their agents represent other players in the NFL. And then more than that, this is a players' league at the end of the day. And I know some people are going to disagree with this, but if you have star players and you treat those star players right, that goes into other players and other free agents and those type of things, right? Guys are more likely willing to come to you if you're willing to take care of your current players, especially when it's guys like Jakobi Meyers, right? There are some owners out there. Jerry Jones is a great example of this. Agents hate Jerry Jones. Players don't sign with the Dallas Cowboys. Like, when was the last time the Cowboys signed a big name free agent? You literally cannot think of one. I don't know if they've signed anyone in the last 10 years that's, notable. Players don't want to go to the Cowboys, and part of that is because of the owner. And for the Raiders, if your general manager John Spytek is taking care of your players, I think that kind of goes around into the NFL. So hopefully the Raiders kind of figure this out. Now I want to go ahead and wrap this video up. I want to just get into one other thing. This one's kind of interesting because, the Raiders have some players that I think they could potentially move off of. And then they have some other guys that they could potentially bring in that could potentially provide some value. ESPN did a trade proposal for the Las Vegas Raiders. And this was kind of interesting because they feel like, hey, the Raiders, who have edge Tyree Wilson, who, he's kind of a part-time player at this point. He hasn't had the success that we kind of expected when we drafted him. Could the Raiders move him and potentially bring in a guy like Braxton Jones, who recently just got benched? The Chicago Bears took Braxton Jones, who I believe is in his 4th year at this point, he started well over 30 games for the Bears at this point. He's a left tackle, which the Raiders need at this point. Could the Raiders make this trade, and could this work? And I want to talk about this trade, but I also want to give you guys a couple other trade candidates that I think would be smart for the Raiders to consider because it could potentially have us upgrade certain positions that we kind of need. So first and foremost, just with this trade alone, I don't think it makes sense. I am a believer that even though Tyree Wilson, he is the type of player he is right now, he was the 7th overall pick, and he may not have lived up to that. I do think by the time this guy gets into the 7th, 8th, 9th year of his NFL career, he'll be a very productive football player, right? Play in, play out, he will be productive. And even if he's not, I would rather keep a guy like Tyree Wilson than just trade him. That too, you're trading him for a guy that literally just got benched. And Braxton Jones obviously is logical because he did get benched, but he is still, he still has some upside. He's still really, really young. He has good movement. He is an offense tackle that has potential. And then with that, the Raiders need a left tackle, at least right now. And then, maybe down the line, he could swap and compete at the right tackle position. So I understand from that perspective, but, if the Bears say we'll take a 7th round pick for Braxton Jones, I'd be more likely to give them that. I just don't think Tyree Wilson makes sense at this point. I think Tyree Wilson's potential and his best football is still in front of him, and he's still really young as well. So let's just let this guy continue to develop. Plus, believe it or not, he had the best game of his career just this past game, right? So we'll see what ends up happening as we kind of go forward. Again, I would not trade Tyree, but I do want to talk to you guys about some guys that the Raiders could potentially trade for. So obviously the most obvious is going to be the quarterback position, given that Geno Smith is struggling. There are quarterbacks out there that have been recently not released, but replaced, right? We know Joe Flacco, for example, got replaced, and then he ultimately got shipped over to the Bengals. We also know that Russell Wilson was starting for the Giants, and he pretty much got benched, and then the Giants, kind of go on this win streak with the rookie quarterback. But some people are saying that, hey, for the Raiders, could it make sense to bring in Russell Wilson, given he has those ties to Pete Carroll? I like Russell Wilson. I think he's a pretty good quarterback, but he also isn't a great quarterback at this point. I don't think Russell Wilson can do anything for the Raiders that Geno Smith isn't already kind of doing. I've watched a lot of Russell Wilson since he got to the Broncos, to be honest, and then even most recently with the Giants. I don't think Russell Wilson at this point can change a game. I don't think he can carry a team. I think Wilson's more of the type of quarterback you have to carry yourself. I just don't think this makes sense. Now, the Giants have another backup quarterback in Jameis Winston. He is more of the type of quarterback that I would kind of go in for. Now, again, I don't think the Raiders, I don't think it would be smart to say, hey, you traded a 3rd round pick for Geno Smith. Let's make another trade. Let's bring in another quarterback, and let's go a completely different route. Given you also traded for Kenny Pickett, right? So I think for the Raiders, the best thing you can do at this point is just stick with Geno Smith. Let's just give him the rest of this season. If not rest of the season, if he struggles for the next 6-7 games, you can make the swap towards the end of the season in the hopes that Kenny Pickett can potentially spark your team. And then maybe you can roll forward with Kenny Pickett the following season if that kind of happens. Or if it doesn't, and you know that Geno's not the guy, Kenny's not the guy, maybe you can figure it out going into next season. I don't think it makes any sense to trade for a quarterback at this point. Now, there is one other player in New York. It's not a quarterback, and it's not even for the Giants. It's actually a running back for the New York Jets. And this might not make sense because the Raiders do already have Ashton Jeanty. But, if the Raiders want to be a run-first and run-heavy team, I think having a true, it's not even an RB2. That's not even the right words. But, a true backup running back that is, a potential game changer, I think a guy like Breece Hall could make a lot of sense for the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't think Breece Hall's value is as high as it once was. But I think after his rookie season and even his second season, the guy's value was through the roof. But, some injuries have happened. He's kind of slowed down a little bit. But he's still a good running back. And I think for the Raiders, you look at Raheem Mostert. Mostert had one good game. And part of that, I think, also came because of the blocking. The blocks just work. But the thing with Mostert, and I think a lot of us see it, is he just doesn't break tackles. He just doesn't make people miss. The Raiders literally don't have a second running back they can go to besides Ashton Jeanty at this point. And think about this. In this very last game that the Raiders had, there was a moment in this game against the Titans where Ashton Jeanty has, 7 yards, 10 yards, 8 yards, 6 yards, just a bunch of nice runs on one drive, and we get all the way down into a 2nd and 3 situation where the 15-yard line, they put in Mostert, instantly we lose 3 yards, ruins the drive. The Raiders, backup running back, has struggled, and I think for the Raiders, you could potentially bring in a guy like Breece Hall, and it does help your roster. It does make you better. Also, do keep in mind, you bring in Breece Hall, you're also saying we are trying to win this season, which I know some Raider fans are against that, and for all we know, maybe Pete Carroll and John Spytek don't want to win either. But if they do want to win, if they do want to be the best football team this season, I think Breece Hall can make a lot of sense. He's still a good running back. He could still be really productive. And I think it just makes it that much easier for a guy like Ashton Jeanty. Don't overlook the fact that, the Seattle Seahawks with Pete Carroll, multiple times, they had a good running back 1 and a good running back 2. Multiple times in the Pete Carroll era, right? 2 different eras. The first, the Marshawn Lynch era, and then you got the Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet era. Pete Carroll wanted to have 2 running backs that were good, and we don't have that right now. Right, so I think running back is another position that could make sense. And another position that I think could make sense for the Raiders to potentially target would be defensive line. The Raiders obviously had a lot of cap invested in Christian Wilkins. A lot of what we thought we would do this season involved that guy. And that came to an end real quick, and the Raiders cut him. And, we have this big void essentially on that defensive line without Christian Wilkins, right? He was supposed to be one of our best players. Really never worked out. And now the Raiders defensive line, is not great. In terms of generating pressure, the Raiders struggle a little bit. And I think for the Raiders, one of the things you have to figure out is how do you continue to have success on the defensive line? That too, you play the Chiefs, you play the Chargers still, you got the Broncos twice. You have to figure out how to beat up on those offensive lines. Those are some of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Right? Some people think the Broncos O-line is the best. And the Chiefs have an issue going on with their left tackle right now, but they have a good offensive line. Chargers are hurt, but they have a good offensive line. Chances are when we play the Chargers the next time, there'll be a healthy O-line. So how do you get pressure? Obviously, getting some defensive linemen would make sense. And here's 3 guys that I think could be available. Now, the first one I don't think makes so much sense given Trey Hendrickson wants to get paid long-term. So Hendrickson's probably around like $35 million. I don't think that's going to make sense for the Raiders at this point. I don't think that's where the Raiders are in terms of like, hey, let's bring in some edge players and let's sign some edge players. Although I do think Hendrickson fits this scheme a little bit better than a guy like Malcolm Koonce, maybe even a guy like Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson's more of like a defensive tackle, I think, in this scheme than he is like an edge player. And he's not super versatile, right? Like Koonce is, mostly speed. So he's going to be standing up in like a 2-point stance, while Wilson is mostly like a defensive tackle, right, in a 3-point stance. A guy like Hendrickson's a little bit more versatile. Even a guy like Carl Granderson of the New Orleans Saints, I think he's another guy that could potentially become available. The guy has, I think, like 5 sacks already on this season. He's a productive football player. He's another guy that I think fits the scheme. And I know some of these guys are probably not going to happen. Like Hendrickson's probably not going to happen. Some people have mentioned like Jeffrey Simmons. I don't think that makes sense either, to be 100% honest with you guys. Jeffrey Simmons is a phenomenal player, but the Titans, they're trying to win some games. And at some point, Cam Ward can click. And at some point, Cam Ward can become a top 10 quarterback. And if that happens, well, you want Jeffrey Simmons on the other side to kind of help lead the defense while you have this rookie quarterback leading the offense. You don't want to sell all these players, right? So Simmons might not make sense. A guy that could make sense, and I think this one could technically happen, especially given the Raiders are struggling a little bit at the cornerback position. Tariq Woolen, the Seattle Seahawks corner, is struggling. And, Mike McDonald runs a completely different scheme than what Pete Carroll ran, right? McDonald runs a cover 2. Carroll kind of mixes in a lot of cover 1, a lot of base defense. Tariq Woolen did have a lot of success with the Seahawks, and there's a chance he ends up getting moved. And if he does get moved, I think he'd be a phenomenal fit for the Las Vegas Raiders. I truly think Tariq Woolen is one of the better cornerbacks if you're able to put him in the right scheme and system. And which better scheme and system than the one he kind of came up in, right? So to me, I think Tariq Woolen could definitely make a lot of sense. Obviously, Hendrickson probably doesn't make sense. Simmons probably doesn't make sense. And there's some guards, but the Raiders have like worked out a couple guards and brought in a couple guards, so probably not going to get another one of those guys. But a corner can make sense. And, as we talk about these trade candidates potentially for the Raiders, there's also some guys we could potentially sell. There's guys that I think, they have value, and I don't know if the Raiders want to keep them long-term anyways. A guy like Malcolm Koonce can go for a pretty high pick at this point. And I say Malcolm Koonce, not that I don't want him long-term, but, if Koonce, and he hasn't really broken out, but like, if in like the final 7 games, if he gets like 6 sacks in the last 7 games, or some crazy numbers, he's going to get $22 million, and the Raiders might not pay him anyways at that point. So if I'm the Raiders, if I'm John Spytek, I am sitting now with Malcolm Koonce and seeing kind of where he's at right now. And if the numbers fit, I extend him now. if he wants to wait until the end of the season to see how he kind of finishes, I know the type of player Malcolm Koonce is. He's going to have success at some point. I would look to potentially trade him. Not that I want to, but I just think it might make sense from a value perspective, given he's not under contract long term. Again, there's other guys you can potentially trade, right? Dylan Parham's a guy. And I think that's something you have to decide after the next couple of games before the trade deadline. If you're 2-5, 2-6, 2-7 at some point, and the trade deadline's approaching, you might say Dylan Parham, you've played fairly well, but we're probably not going to bring you back. You might be able to be swapped for like a 5th round pick. I'm considering that as well, right? So there are players, if I'm the Las Vegas Raiders that we have, I am considering to sell. I probably wouldn't trade Michael Mayer, given he just had a monster game, but if you're struggling, Brock Bowers the future, and if Mayer's value is high enough, if a team's willing to give you a 2nd or 3rd round pick, that's another guy you have to consider, because at some point, if Michael Mayer does end up having, even if it doesn't happen this year, but like in his, going into his 4th season, if he has 1,200 yards, let's just say it happens, he's gonna want 25, 30 million. Like, you're gonna just price yourselves out of a guy like Mayer, and you can wait until next year to do that anyways. But there are guys you have to consider based off the contract. We had talked about guys like Robert Spillane, Trayvon Merrick, Nate Hobbs, right? We had talked about these guys last year and potentially trading them, and we lost all these guys for nothing, right? Because you could not sign them. You didn't have the cap money. So again, to me, if I'm John Spytek, take the Bill Belichick approach, ship guys off 1 year early rather than 1 year late. 1 year late means you don't get anything. 1 year early means you get a pick out of it, right? So let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.